All right, let's dive into the world of personality today. We're going to be taking a deep dive into histrionic personality disorder, or HPD for short. We've got a whole bunch of research on this and really want to pull out the most interesting parts for you guys so you can really get a sense of what HPD is all about, where it comes from and how it's treated.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, we're not just talking about someone who, like, enjoys attention. It's, like, way more than that.
Mm-hmm.
With HPV, the need to be the center of attention is so strong that it, like, really shapes their whole reality.
Right.
Even the word histrionic kind of hints at this. It comes from the Latin word for actor. So you can kind of picture someone who's constantly, like, on stage craving that spotlight.
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting way to put it. So it's not just like being a drama queen or something, right? There's this
Mhm.
real depth to it. And the research actually points to like 8 specific symptoms,
Mm.
and they paint a pretty wild picture, you know? For example,
Yeah.
someone with HPD might have this like excessive need for attention that we were talking about, and it leads them to like dress really flamboyantly or constantly interrupt conversations. It's not just about being noticed, it's about like dominating.
Yeah, exactly. And this often leads to, like, strained relationships
Yeah.
because, imagine trying to have a deep conversation with someone and they just constantly steer it back to themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, this could be really disruptive in their social lives, their professional lives.
Okay, so it's not just about being, the life of the party. There are like real consequences to this.
Right.
What about those exaggerated emotions? I mean, we all have our moments, but how does it manifest in someone with HPD?
Think about someone who just bursts into tears over a spilled drink
Mhm.
or throws a tantrum when they don't get their way. Their emotions can be so over the top and they change so rapidly that it leaves others feeling confused and, even feeling kind of manipulated.
Yeah, you might know someone like this in your life, always reacting in this dramatic way, even to the smallest things. And the research also mentions that people with HPD often use their physical appearance and charm to get attention. What does that look like in real life?
Well, it could be someone who's always wearing the latest trends or, being overly flirtatious or even using their looks to get special treatment.
Yeah.
They might fish for compliments constantly
Yeah.
because they need that reassurance that they're attractive, that they're admired. They really tie their self-worth to how others perceive them.
So their sense of self is really fragile then, always depending on external validation?
Right.
That makes sense when you consider the symptom of suggestibility.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting. Someone with HPD might agree with you one minute and then totally contradict themselves the next. All because they want to please the person they're talking to. They're kind of like a chameleon, constantly changing their colors to fit in.
So how does this constant need for approval impact their relationships? It sounds like it would be tough to build like genuine connections.
Absolutely, it does. Individuals with HPD often crave intimacy, but struggle to maintain those, like, deep, meaningful relationships. They might come on really strong initially, shower someone with attention and affection, but then they kind of pull back when things get too real or too demanding. It's like they're always performing a role, even in their closest relationships.
Yeah, it's almost as if they're afraid of true intimacy, right? Because it means letting go of that persona that they've so carefully crafted.
Hmm.
But what happens when that need for attention isn't met?
Well, that's when we might see some manipulative behaviors kind of emerge. This could be anything from playing the victim to evoke sympathy to using guilt trips to kind of get their way. They
Yeah.
might also exaggerate their accomplishments or their problems just to make themselves seem more interesting or important.
So it's not always intentional manipulation, though, is it? But rather like a subconscious way of meeting that deep-seated need for validation.
You hit the nail on the head. It's important to understand that these behaviors often stem from a place of insecurity and a fragile sense of self.
Okay, so we've unpacked a lot about how HPD looks in real life. But what causes it?
Well, we know it's complex. It's likely a mix of nature and nurture. There might be a genetic predisposition to certain personality traits that make someone more vulnerable to HPD.
So some people might be born with a temperament that kind of makes them more susceptible to this need for attention.
Exactly. But then we also have to consider the environmental factors, right? Early childhood experiences like trauma or critical parenting, or even environments that just overemphasize the need for approval. These can all contribute to the development of HPD.
So it's that classic interplay of genetics and environment. If someone's displaying these symptoms, what can be done? The research seems to point towards psychotherapy as like the primary treatment.
Absolutely. Specifically, therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT for short. This approach helps individuals become more aware of those negative thought patterns, like believing they're only worthwhile if they're the center of attention. They learn to challenge those thoughts and replace them with healthier ones.
So instead of seeking validation from the outside, they start to cultivate a sense of self-worth from within. That sounds incredibly empowering.
It is. And alongside therapy, medication might be used to address any co-occurring conditions, like anxiety or depression, which often go hand in hand with HPD. It's about providing like a comprehensive approach to treatment.
Yeah, it's not just about managing the symptoms. It's about transforming how someone experiences themselves in the world. What really stood out to me in all this research was the emotional toll that HPD takes on the individual. That constant need for attention, the feeling of performing in social situations, it can be incredibly draining.
You're absolutely right. It's like wearing a mask all the time, never truly feeling seen for who you are. This is why long-term therapy is so crucial. It helps individuals shed those masks and discover their inherent self-worth. And this allows them to build genuine connections based on authenticity.
And that brings us to a really interesting question.
Given our, hyper-connected world, could societal pressures to seek validation and attention contribute to the development or worsening of HPD? Think about all the messages we're bombarded with daily. The emphasis on likes, followers, what does that do to our sense of self?
That's a question we should all be asking ourselves. Are we, in a way, all performing to some extent?
It's a thought-provoking question, isn't it? And it highlights the importance of promoting authenticity and self-acceptance in our culture.
Absolutely. But before we get too lost in the big picture, let's bring it back to what we've learned about HPD. What are some key takeaways you think our listeners should walk away with?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's crucial to understand that HPD is a complex condition with roots in both biology and personal experience. It's not a simple case of attention-seeking. It's a way of being in the world that can be incredibly challenging, both for the individual and those around them.
And effective treatment focuses on helping individuals develop those core skills like empathy, emotional awareness, and setting boundaries.
Those are the tools that empower someone with HPD to meet their needs in healthier ways and build more stable relationships.
It's about empowering them to break free from that constant need for external validation and build a more authentic and fulfilling life.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that recovery is a journey, often a long one. It requires patience, compassion, and a willingness to dive deep into those underlying vulnerabilities.
But the rewards can be profound, both for the individual and for the people they love. Now, let's dive even deeper into those 8 key symptoms and see how they might play out in everyday situations.
Yeah, those 8 symptoms are really key. They can help us recognize when someone might be struggling with HPD. And understanding them better allows us to offer support and encouragement.
Okay, so let's unpack those symptoms even further. We talked about, someone with an excessive need for attention might dress flamboyantly. What are some other real-world examples of this playing out?
Well, picture that person at a party who always has to tell the most outrageous story, or the coworker who dominates every meeting with their, pronouncements. They might even fish for compliments constantly, really needing that constant reassurance that they're the center of attention.
Yeah, they can't just enjoy the moment. They have to be the main attraction. What about those exaggerated emotions we talked about? How might those show up in everyday life?
Imagine someone bursting into tears over a minor inconvenience, or throwing a tantrum when they don't get their way. You might see them overreacting to situations that others wouldn't find as upsetting, creating drama where there doesn't need to be any. And their emotions can shift so quickly, too, which leaves people around them feeling, confused or even manipulated.
It's like they're always on an emotional roller coaster. I remember you mentioned individuals with HPD often use their physical appearance to grab attention. What are some subtle ways this might manifest?
Think about that friend who's always dressed to the nines, even for a casual coffee date, or the person who uses their charm and flirtation to, get special treatment. They might fish for compliments on their looks constantly, really tying their self-worth to those external validations.
They're always performing,
Yeah.
even in the most ordinary settings. And this all ties back to that suggestibility symptom, right?
Exactly. Individuals with HPD can be so easily swayed by others' opinions that they might change their views in a heartbeat just to, fit in or gain approval. This makes it really hard for them to develop a strong sense of self because they're always trying to mirror what they think other people want to see.
So they're constantly adapting their personality to match the people around them. No wonder it's difficult for them to form genuine connections. We talked about their relationships tending to be superficial. Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure. While they might crave intimacy, individuals with HPD often struggle with the vulnerability and depth that real relationships require. So you might see them come on strong initially, shower someone with attention and affection, but then pull away when things start to require, like, more effort or commitment.
Yeah, it's like they're afraid of getting too close
Yeah.
and revealing their true selves, almost as if they're always performing a role, even in their romantic relationships. What happens when their need for attention isn't met in these relationships?
That's when those manipulative behaviors we talked about might come into play. It could be as subtle as playing the victim to get sympathy, or as overt as, like, using guilt trips to get their way. You might also see them exaggerating their achievements or problems to try and appear more, interesting or important.
So it's not always a conscious attempt to manipulate, though, but rather a way of fulfilling that deep-seated need for validation.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that these behaviors often stem from a place of insecurity and a fragile sense of self. Now, here's something that might surprise you. Individuals with HPD often show a disinterest in routine tasks. Can you guess why?
That's an interesting one. I would guess that routine and structure don't exactly provide the excitement and attention they crave.
You're right on the mark. Individuals with HPD thrive on novelty and excitement. They might jump from project to project without finishing anything, or get bored easily with, everyday responsibilities. That constant need for stimulation can make it difficult to maintain stability in their work or personal lives.
So it's almost like they're addicted to the rush of new experiences and attention. But ultimately, all of this comes back to that core issue of self-esteem and needing that external validation, right?
Precisely. Because their sense of self-worth is so fragile, they constantly seek approval from others to feel good about themselves. It becomes a vicious cycle of attention-seeking behaviors and emotional instability.
So it's like they're building their entire sense of self on shifting sand, always needing that external validation to stay afloat.
That's a powerful analogy. And it highlights why therapy is so crucial for individuals with HPD. Therapy provides a safe space to explore those underlying insecurities and develop a stronger internal foundation. It helps them understand their own emotional patterns, challenge negative thoughts, and learn, like, healthier coping mechanisms.
So instead of relying on that external validation, they can start cultivating that sense of worth from within.
That's the ultimate goal. It's about empowering individuals with HPD to move from a place of seeking attention to a place of genuine connection and self-acceptance.
Now, before we move on, I want to touch on something we discussed earlier. The idea that societal pressures might be contributing to HPD. With our culture's obsession with validation and attention, it seems like a valid concern.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? Are we all, to some extent, performing for an audience in this age of social media and self-promotion?
It makes you wonder if our constant quest for likes and followers might be inadvertently feeding this need for external validation.
It's definitely a conversation worth having. We should be promoting authenticity and self-acceptance, encouraging people to find their worth from within, rather than relying on those external sources.
Absolutely. Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground here, but are there any other key takeaways you'd like to emphasize for our listener before we wrap up?
I think it's crucial to understand that recovery from HPD is a journey, and it's often a long and challenging one. It requires patience, compassion, and a willingness to delve into those deeper vulnerabilities.
And remember, seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. There are resources available to support those who are struggling with HPD.
It's about taking that first step towards healing and creating a more fulfilling life.
As we're wrapping up this deep dive into HPD, I keep thinking about empathy. We've talked about how important it is for, individuals with HPD to develop empathy as part of their journey. But what about, all of us? Could a greater focus on empathy help us all navigate this world that often feels obsessed with attention and validation?
Oh, that's a really interesting point. You're suggesting that empathy isn't just this, therapeutic tool, but something we could all benefit from, especially in, today's world.
Exactly. What if we all made a conscious effort to understand and connect with each other on a deeper level, Could that create a more compassionate and fulfilling experience for everyone? Could it even be a way to kind of counteract those societal pressures that might be contributing to HPD?
It's a really inspiring idea, and I think it really speaks to the heart of what we've been talking about today. Maybe one of the most valuable takeaways from exploring HPD is this reminder that genuine connection, empathy, and self-awareness, they're just essential for a more meaningful life, not just for those with HPD, but for all of us, right?
So, to our listener, We want to leave you with this. How can you cultivate more empathy in your own life? How can you connect more authentically with the people around you? And how can you contribute to a world where validation comes not just from external sources, but from a deep sense of self-worth?
Those are really powerful questions, definitely worth pondering. And we hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights to take with you.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of the fascinating world of histrionic personality disorder. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.